Good morning, good morning. Welcome everyone. Welcome to the second last day of Curiosity Brisbane. My name is Benjamin Law and my official title here is Master of Curious Conversations here at the festival. I'm so pleased that you've all made time for this session today on this weekend, and I'm so pleased to be joining you here on the lands of the Turrbal and Yagara people. First Nations people on this continent have been making art, discovering science, sharing knowledge here for tens of thousands of years. Together they constitute the oldest continuing civilization this planet has ever seen, and we are very grateful to elders past and present that we can still explore science, make art, share knowledge here on what is and what will always be Aboriginal land. Now, today's session is called How Can Cross-Collaboration Shape the STEAM Conversation? So I'm really interested in this emerging kind of dialogue that we've had for a while where we know STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. But now increasingly we're starting to talk about STEAM. Now what does that mean? Now we're going to illustrate it in a very interesting way because look, whether you watch Sesame Street or RuPaul's Drag Race, you'll know that everyone loves puppets. And Dead Puppet Society is one of Queensland's most innovative theatre companies. Last year, however, the pandemic shut down all touring and theatrical performances, and the company took a pause to think about its future. But that pause allowed Dead Puppet Society to expand its repertoire, and key to that has been cross-collaborating with other skill sets within the world of STEM, science, technology, engineering and maths. And what Dead Puppet Society adds to that mix is the A, the arts, that turns STEM into STEAM, which is at the heart of so many conversations we're having here at Curiosity Brisbane. So what happens when art and STEM combine? What can these disciplines tell us about each other? And also, where do robotics fit into this conversation as well? Because we have a hunch that this might be the thing that really illustrates these kind of abstract conversations for today. Our first guest is a writer, director and designer who's worked across British, American and Australian theatre industries. He holds a PhD in puppetry and visual theatre from QUT. He's also a founding member and the creative director of the critically acclaimed Dead Puppet Society, which has been nominated for 6 Helpman Awards and an Olivier Award. Please welcome Dr. David Morton.
Thanks, Ben. I haven't heard doctor for a while. That's hilarious.
You've got to use it more, right? I mean, you are technically Dr. David Morton, right?
Yeah,
okay. I love that.
I feel like every time it pops up, it hits again like a bit of a bust. You go, oh, God, that's right.
That's right. Oh, my gosh.
Say intelligent things. It's got to be legitimate.
Those 3 to 4 years that I actually spent working on a thesis, you've just erased them from your mind.
Yeah,
they can be traumatic things, PhDs. I understand. Our other guest is a robotics researcher and educator and distinguished professor of robotic vision at QUT. He's the director of the Arc Centre of Excellence for Robotic Vision, chief scientist of Dorabot, author of the best-selling textbook Robotics, Vision and Control, which is currently being updated, as we understand, has won national and international recognition for teaching, including the title of Australian University Teacher of the Year. And he's held visiting positions at Oxford, the University of Illinois, Carnegie Mellon University, and the University of Pennsylvania. Please welcome Professor Peter Cork, everyone.
Thank you.
So this is going to be a really interesting conversation because I don't think many people necessarily think of puppetry and robotics in their mind as synonymous with each other. But of course, there are so many opportunities and ways in which they've already merged. David, I want to start with you because if we go into the Queen Street Mall right now, we'll see an incredible sculpture / installation of fish that seem to be swimming of their own accord. And when you get closer to the fish, they start reacting in different ways. This sculpture is called Shoal. It's something that you've helped make. You've been a part of the team that has made and driven this. I want to know about Shoal and how it came about, and also the backstory of why it came about in this particular moment.
Yeah, totally. Perhaps to answer that, maybe I go back in time a little bit just to talk a little bit about the company and and how this has emerged from it. So Dead Puppet Society's been based in Brisbane now for the last 12 years. We came out of the Queensland University of Technology, and what we try to do with our work is to create a form of theatre that doesn't look like the forms of theatre that particularly the main stage companies are creating. So when we sort of graduated, we were looking at works that we really enjoyed and found ourselves more drawn to sort of like musical theatre, and yet still had the cringe at the songs, and sort of like what is it that we can make that fits into this sphere that is not just people standing in a living room or next to a kitchen sink talking about their mundane human problems. And so we were like, at that point, maybe the grab that we can use for this to create these deeply imaginative stories is puppets. And we don't use puppets in a Sesame Street. I'm so glad you mentioned RuPaul too. That's hilarious. It's just like, yeah, both. Damn it. We don't use puppets in, sort of the furry monster slapstick for children sort of manner. We always use puppets in our performances alongside human actors, and we always use them to play characters that a human actor couldn't. So one of our works was about the young life of Charles Darwin, and the animals that he interacted with were all played with puppets. We've done sort of superhero shows where we've had roboticized drones that fly around to represent various characters. So our approach to puppetry is always in trying to create mechanisms that can represent,
it's not the googly-eyed version of an anthropomorphic creature, but it might be actually large-scale stuff. It might be small-scale stuff that we might not think of as like puppets like this, but is representing something beyond.
Totally, exactly, yeah. So I wanted to say that, sort of by way of the form that we use as a company, but Shoal specifically as a work. My partner Nick, who's here, who I run the company with, or who actually runs the company, and I tag along mostly. Anyone who knows how we work
later,
that's
guys.
true. Yeah. But our work's always been concerned with telling stories that are related either to social or ecological justice.
Right.
Like it's always about us trying to position narratives of individuals or ecosystems that are in points of suffering or collapse, and weaving narratives around those that make them palatable for a mainstream audience, so that Joe Blow off the street can come in, can see a piece of theatre or a piece of entertainment, but can gently have ideas seeded in terms of there being different ways for us to engage in the world, or different means for interaction. So Shoal then picks up those forms of trying to make animal characters a living, breathing thing for a human audience, and then pushes it through this lens of, we couldn't put productions on last year because of COVID, and yet we still wanted to have a voice, and to be able to say things within this sphere that we sort of inhabit. And so Shoal is us trying to humanize a school of blue-green chromis fish whose reef has become bleached. And we all know that coral bleaching is going on, but it feels like it's something that's so far and it's so distant from us. So what we're trying to do with this work is let's personify these little creatures. Let's put them in the heart of a city where we can't escape the fact that they're living in this white coral. And then the robotic element within that is to make them an interactive creature. So they're not just there and they're not oblivious to our presence. When you approach, they become aware of you. So we're sort of hoping, I guess, that we're using, in a way, the gaze of the fish to remind humans that there are other creatures that inhabit this planet.
So what I'm hearing is the work that you've already been doing with your theatre company is part of it involves engineering at its core level already, right? When we're talking about the arts and STEM kind of collaborating, it's already a feat of engineering. But with Shoal, you've introduced a new element with robotics. Is that fair to say? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So about 6 years ago, when the company was working between London, New York, and Brizzy, we realised that the fabrication method we were using for creating our sculptures, doing clay sculpts, plaster casts, was just not tenable when we didn't know where we were going to be in any given month. And so we developed a process for the design of these creatures, designing them all in CAD, so that they were purely digital objects, and then using rapid prototyping technologies like laser cutting, CNC cutting, plasma cutting, 3D printing to then mean that we could realize them very quickly when we then landed wherever that production was going to land. So it's absolutely this emerging process that we've embraced. But this is the first time that the control of those objects has been electric and not Yeah.
Fantastic.
Not humans.
Well, I want to throw over to the guru of robotics that we've got on stage now. Look, before we talk about more specific applications of robotics, we've already got one on the stage that we're talking about now. I want to talk more about your interest in robotics, because as I understand it, you originally wanted to be an astronaut when you grew up,
it was
right?
the era. Right? I grew up in the 60s, and yeah, everyone wanted to be an astronaut. It was a time of enormous excitement about what technology could do.
Yes.
I think since then we realised that it is very double-edged. But back then I think it was all upside, and so you're still disappointed that I can't go to the space station or go to the moon. Yeah? I was dudded, right?
maybe you can go on one of Richard Branson's personal private kind of
huge
space
expense
expeditions.
yeah.
That's right. So I understand where your imagination and how it was captured by astronauts and travelling to space. When did robotics capture your imagination, and why?
Robotics didn't capture my imagination really until I got my first job, and I was working as a research assistant at Melbourne University, and I was doing much more esoteric engineering stuff there. But for an open day, we had this idea of making something that was compelling example of how you get computers to control things. So that was kind of my research interest, and so we thought we could just get a little robot, and you could buy little robots, about this big. You could play a game of checkers, drafts, right? And so that's what we cobbled together with that time we called it a mini computer, and it's like a cabinet about this big, right? And wrote all the code in archaic computer language to make the robot play a game of drafts, and that was interesting. So I got sort of given carte blanche to build the thing, and did that, and that was fascinating. So it was the first time that I'd actually had anything to do with robotics myself. And then a little bit later, that same year, there was an ad in the paper for CSIRO. They wanted someone to do robotics. And they had a lab that was just like 4 blocks away from the university. So it's really cool. So I applied and I got the job, and I've been doing robotics ever since. So,
That's really great.
So yeah, short answer is I answered an ad in the newspaper.
When
we used to do that, right?
Yeah. I think a lot of us, depending on your generation, when you think of robots, you think of, the Jetsons. There's a maid doing things that a human being usually would, but it's a robot.
But it's also part of the era, Benjamin. The things that you watched on TV. There was the Jetsons with Rosie. There was Get Smart with Jaime.
Yes.
There was Lost in Space. So robots were real. Right? I mean, you saw portrayals of them on television, and I'm sure that sort of sunk into the subconscious. And they were mostly good. Right? That's
mostly benevolent.
Mostly benevolent, yeah.
Until maybe Alien in 1979.
Yeah, and so I guess more modern, more recent robot movies explore the dark side.
I mean, to what extent is the conversation around robotics about striving to get mechanical creatures that can replicate the things we can do, and to what extent is the conversation about finding ways to build things that can do things that we can't?
I think we're driven by doing the light on the hill is to create a machine that can do what we can do. That's still hard, right? So we're still a long way from that. But as that gets closer, then I guess we're going to start to think about creating machines that are better than us. You have a long conversation about what better means, and that's perhaps scary. I think I find that idea a bit intimidating. But I think as that gets closer, that we can just build a machine that does what we do, that's the next frontier.
Now, you're particularly interested in how robots can use a sense of vision,
correct,
to accomplish a huge range of tasks, sophisticated tasks. What kind of tasks are we talking about that rely on that sense?
If you think about almost everything that we do every day, we rely on vision for almost everything. So to not have a sense of vision is a profound disability, handicap for humans. So a robot that can't see has that handicap, right? So if I wanted a robot, you say, pass me the bottle of water, right? What does bottle of water mean? So a robot needs to be able to take a picture, and we take pictures with our eyes. You know, this is about a 120 megapixel camera that you've got in your head, right? And then you can process all those pixels, but you don't think in terms of pixels, an amount of red, green, and blue. You think about the world in terms of objects. And that's the critical bit that's missing. How do you go from a picture to a sense of the objects that are within that scene? Because it's objects that you want to... We have a conversation, we talk about the objects in the scene. We don't talk about red, green, and blue pixel values. And so that's an abstraction of an image. And so that's been my big interest. So if I was a robot and I said to the robot, go out through the door and fetch me something, the robot has to think about where it can walk or where it can drive. So it needs to think about where's a flat bit, and it needs to know that there are these things called humans, and it's kind of rude to run into them or hit them. If there's a chair that's in its way, it can push the chair, but not if there's a human on the chair. That would be rude. So there's a whole bunch of sort of common sense knowledge we have about objects and what they can do and how we can use them. And a robot, if it's going to be useful to us, it needs to know all that stuff. And we're a long way off from that, but that's my big interest.
You've talked about the human eye in such a memorable way that it's a 120 megapixel thing, but it's also such a complex part of our body. For those of us who can see, we kind of often take that for granted, the way in which it operates. So I guess a part of the work that you and others do is trying to get machines to not only replicate that, but process what they're actually seeing.
Yeah.
When you say we're a fair way off, how far away are you talking about?
Look, at the moment, we have got systems that we can train. So there's this whole thing you might have heard of called deep learning, which is a way where you don't write a program that looks at all the pixels and says, this particular pattern of pixels means a bottle. What we do is we show deep learning systems a bazillion examples of all kinds of objects, and it learns if you show it another picture, it'll say that's a bottle, or that's a cat, or that's a dog. So we don't actually write programs to say there's a whole bunch of rules that mean dog, or a whole bunch of rules that mean cat. We train it on examples. And this is fascinating. This is something we couldn't do 6 years ago, and now it's everywhere. Your phone, you've probably shows faces, puts a box around faces. That's done by deep learning. It's a little network of neurons modeled very loosely on our brain that does that. If you've got your photos stored in something like Google Photos and you say, show me all the photos I've got of a beach, right? And Google Photos pulls up all the photos of beaches. That's a deep network that's learned to map all those patterns of pixels into semantic labels
and
that
learning
we can reason with.
Learning as an ongoing process, or is it a case of code or algorithms that have been written in and are settled, or does the learning continue and update itself?
It depends, but oftentimes you just do a whole bunch of learning and you've got a network, and then once you've got the network it's trained, then you can use it. So you've trained a network knows 1,000 things, you can show it a picture and it'll say it's a cat, it's a dog. Even if it's a sort of dog it's never seen before, it's fairly likely to say that it's a dog. And we don't quite know how these things work, and that's a little scary. But it's what you did when you were kids, right? Your parents showed you picture books.
We have lost control.
You showed you picture books of cat, dog, sheep, cow, and that's how we learned. And that's today how we train robots to have these capabilities. But there's really cool consequences of that, and that is that we learn stuff. Right? We have a period of our life when we learn stuff, and then we have a period of our life when we're useful. And then we die, and all the knowledge goes away. It's not like that for robots, right? The robots, I can learn a whole bunch of stuff if I was a robot, and you could be a robot, and you'd learn some stuff, and you'd see a new thing, right? So you'd have a learning moment, your network would be updated, and you could share that with me.
Okay.
Right? And it can all be in the cloud, so even when the robot goes to the scrap heap, the knowledge is still there. The knowledge that robots have could be a one-way street, it's a ratchet. You can never go backwards. And that's the sort of thing that I find a little bit terrifying, because I know that it's possible. And so we're starting to have debates about artificial intelligence. Is it a good thing or is it not?
Okay, I want to park that and
Yeah, sure.
return to it. Partly because you're giving me a panic attack. But look, just before we move on, we've got David here, and he's brought to us an incredible, beautiful, elegant example of the way in which robotics feed into and create art. When it comes to the marriage of robotics and art, have you seen some really good examples in your time where you're like, that's robotics applied in a way that I wouldn't have thought of, but within the realm of art that illuminates what robotics can do?
So when I went down and had a look at David's installation before this session this morning, and I look at it at two levels. One is just this wonderful, inspired vision of all these little fish, and the reminder about the damage that we're doing to the environment. So I can look at it at that level. The other level, I look at it and say servo motor, serial communication bus, infrared sensor. So I can see the components that are in there, and I know what they are, and I know how they all work. But I take my hat off to David to be able to put all that together in a way that hides all that horrible detail that only geeks care about, and makes something that's deeply impressive. So I think it's a wonderful use of technology.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably something that we should use in the teaching of STEM. I'm an academic at QT. I teach engineering, and it can be a bit dry. And I think you could probably motivate students more by showing them how you could apply this to non-industrial applications. It doesn't have to be an application that's making things or making money. It can just be for the delight.
Yeah.
And I think that gets lost too often.
So you have created this piece that evokes delight. I think it evokes a range of emotions because of what it represents. I wonder, though, at the same time, it does involve all those components that you talk about, the nerdy stuff, the very technical side of things. This is kind of a world premiere of this installation, and any kind of debut involves a lot of trial and errors. What were the kind of challenges and surprises along the way in making this?
Yeah, that's a great question. First up, thank you, Peter, for the compliment, but I need to bat some of it because he's going to hate me pointing him out. But Lockie, who's sitting in the back, came up with all the technical systems that actually make the fish do their thing. Legend. I think probably one of the biggest, I want to say roadblocks, fun speed bumps, we came across with the coming together of this work is everything we do as a company is always highly collaborative. We love sort of bringing in experts from various fields to dream together and to vision, what a work or a product might look like. A part of that process is then that a lot of those, individual elements are developed in isolation or are siloed, and then there's the moment of the bringing together. We're very used to doing that in a theatre, where there's set processes and there's set ways of bringing those things together. With this, there isn't. And so I think, that these moments of the plugging the thing together, seeing that it works, but then moving it to a new context and the senses behaving differently. And so us having to tweak those, and then the way that the weather over the last 2 weeks has impacted that sculpture, which like it's been remarkably uneventful, thank God. Yeah.
How does that work, by the way? Because I'm just assuming, I didn't do great at science, but I'm just assuming like mechanical parts and water don't really tend to mix. And you've got an outdoor installation that's actually in the open air.
Yeah.
So how have you actually ensured that it can continue working in any kind of weather event?
Yeah, so when there's a couple of things in there. The first is like to try and mitigate the error, or the explosion. So all of the, I say explosion, no, I just stopped working, right? Not like a boom, hopefully. All of the wedges that make up the sculpture are all sealed individually, and they have, waterproofing strips that are run around them so that when they're crimped together, it stops the water from heading in. The sections that the fish come out of have sort of a multiple part flange that stops most of the water from getting in. And the thing's also set intentionally on an angle to let the runoff happen. So there's these things that are in place that we've used to try and stop water getting in. We're also aware of the fact that things are greenhouse, and it gets incredibly hot underneath that perspex, so it intentionally has ventilation built into it to move it through. But then the second layer of sort of defense we've got against it is that all of the pieces are very easily replaceable. So we have over the last couple of weeks had, I think, 3 or 4 of the servos that drive the fish just give up. And so, yeah, it's about a 10-minute job to go under and to pull that section off and to replace it.
Wow.
And so it keeps going. So it's sort of like try and avoid the catastrophe, and then when it happens, move around it.
I mean, you come from an arts theatre background, so how much of this has been like a massive learning curve for you, like essentially becoming an engineer with some side knowledge about robotics?
Yeah, I would say I've just leaned very strongly on my collaborators, but sort of as we do in the theatre as well.
Sure.
I think working in theatre though, and you know this better too as well from the TV work as well, but we are crisis managers before we are everything.
Yeah.
Do you know? I feel like in a theatrical production, everything is always going wrong. That's sort of how they work, and that's why they're great. That's why they're not films, because everything's on a razor edge and there's a gale force wind coming at it constantly to try and knock it off, and the team works to try and make sure that it doesn't. And so this is that in a different context. This is that, except I'm dealing with drunken people coming through the mall at 3 a.m. on a Saturday morning.
Yeah, you can protect against the rain, but can you protect against violence and vomit?
So far.
I think you've answered this question throughout the conversation, but when you go from curiosity to curiosity throughout the festival, you see these installations or these experiences that marry ostensibly disparate fields that form to make STEAM. Something like Maywa AR, where you go and you scan the QR code and you look around you and you can see what Brisbane, Turrbal and Yagara land looked like prior to colonisation, is such a marriage of, we discovered, historians, elders, engineering, tech, algorithms and art. When it comes to Shoal, what are the kind of seemingly disparate disciplines that needed to be married to make this work?
I think potentially it's the elements are less disparate in this work than they often are in our theatre productions, because the processes that we're making use of to fabricate this entity, I don't know, it's sort of they're reasonably commonplace, right? The use of laser cutting and rapid prototyping. So I'm going to say. No, I just hit a dead end.
No.
That's a short
but basically, I see artists, and you've got when you're talking about laser cutting and that sort of stuff. So technology that you've dealt with prior. Did you have to bring on new collaborators on board to make this particular installation what it is?
That's a good question. No, it's actually no. It's the same collaborators, but we're working in a different method. We've all worked together to create performance works, but it's sort of we're literally pulling the explicit story out, and taking away the dark room with lighting and putting it in a mall instead. But more or less, the process for the making of that is sort of largely the same. As a company, though, we have always sort of lent very hard on the fact that the arts is only one element of what we do, and that I think what makes our work sort of stand apart from other works that are on offer in the theatre in Australia is that we do lean incredibly hard on designers, and we lean incredibly hard on emerging technologies and partnerships with large, often multinational companies that are doing interesting things with technology, and how we can embed that within our stories, both to make the stories better and more compelling, but also to show off the tech.
David, Peter, something that you both have in common, in fact, something that the three of us have in common is we're QT people, alum or current serving staff. And I bring that up because, Peter, you are the head of something called, is it the QT Robot Academy?
Yes.
QT, I mean, that sounds really fun.
Or head of.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm the only person in the QT Robot. And it's a side passion project which is around educating students about robotics. So it's kind of what I would teach a QT, but it's a whole bunch of lessons that I, with a large team of people, made into an online format, and that's accessible to anybody, anywhere. I think one of the frustrations with this whole movement towards online education, these things called MOOCs, massive open online courses, that people talked about a lot, sort of 2013, 14, 15, it was heralded the end of universities as we know them, because everyone in the world could just take their courses from Harvard or Stanford or something like that. And so I kind of jumped on that bandwagon, but those things are expensive to maintain. So I created a whole bunch of content, about 200 short lessons. And now they're all online, they're free. So anybody anywhere can
So we can access it.
Yeah,
What would we learn as a part of the QUT Robot Academy, which sounds like a really great superhero franchise, but is actually an educational course with modules?
It is. There's no assessment. So each lesson is quite self-contained. It's sort of 5 to 8 minute video, Peter telling you about a thing. And so there's there about what robots are and why we need them. There's a little bit about ethics of robots. Then there's some sort of quite geeky stuff about, we call kinematics. That's how arm robots work. And there's a bit about computer vision in there, which is kind of one of my other passions. So there's that's in there. But it's basically a QT third year unit, but it's available in a very easy to digest form, I believe, and it's open, online, free. To make it online and free is really important to me, and someone watches a lesson every minute. So I don't know how long we've been talking, but so many people have watched a lesson. Almost 2 million lessons have been delivered since it launched in 2017. And you just get beautiful testimonials from people all around the world, particularly in in countries, say in Middle East, Bangladesh, Pakistan, a lot of Central America, South America. And people just say that if they either don't have the opportunity to go to uni, or if they did have a chance to go to uni, they probably wouldn't have robotics on offer there. And so they can get some of that knowledge, that learning.
I want to pick up on something you said, which has just stuck in my head as soon as you said it, and I'm sure that people have written entire PhD theses and books about this, but when you said one of the first things that's offered in these learning modules is about the ethics of robotics, what do you mean by that, and what are the main ethical considerations people need to be mindful of?
There's a lot. And it strikes me that in my research community, you go to a robotics conference and all these roboticists from all around the world come together and we have a good time and we chat. We don't talk much about the dark side of robotics, which is a bit worrying. So it sort of occurred to me, if I'm teaching robotics, I should at least cover that. In the book that I've written, I've added a little bit about ethics in there as well. I'm not an ethicist, but I've taken an interest, and I think it's something I need to sensitize students about. So, jobs is clearly an obvious one, right? A lot of humans' self-esteem is wrapped up in your job. I'm not sure why that is, but anyway.
Self-esteem and survival, I imagine.
Yeah, survival first, but self-esteem is there. So if robots do all the work, then what do the people do? And if you have billions of people nothing to do, that's not going to end well. So jobs is a really important issue. I think then there are other ones around the weaponization of robots. So you have robot soldiers instead of having human soldiers. So then you can have a war at no cost, essentially no cost to people on your side, and that maybe lead people to think badly. If you can have wars with no consequences or casualties on your side.
I mean, the way that wars are carried out already are very different to wars a generation ago, and largely that's because of the introduction of robotics to warfare.
Correct. So it's a lot of, if you like, robotic technology, automation technology, perception technology in a smart missile. You can just fire it and it will find the target and hit it. That's essentially a robot. But if you've got things that people are talking about, worried about as a weapon, they could recognise a particular person by their face, and take them out. That would be that's possible. And there are discussions in the United Nations at the moment about outlawing some of this stuff. Call them lethal autonomous weapons. So there's conversations going on around outlawing them, but United Nations got a pretty patchy record of outlawing classes of weapons. And the United States still doesn't sign up to anti-personnel mines, right? So that's problematic. Another big one's privacy. And so these robots, and they've got eyes. This is my thing. I want robots that can see. And okay, so where the things that the robot's seeing, where does that go? Right? Does it go into the cloud to be processed? And then who can see through your robot's eyes? I've got a robot vacuum cleaner. It's got cameras. It's a fairly recent one, so it does nice straight line navigation through my house. It uses the camera to recognise where it is in the house. And so it occurred to me one day, I wonder who can see those pictures. I've got no idea. So that's important. I mean, with drone technology, there's issues around privacy there. People being spied on, in their house from drones. So I think they're the big ones. I think it's jobs, it's warfare, and privacy.
I think I've heard roughly 7 episodes of Black Mirror in those things that you've just brought up, in all of those issues you brought up just then. Thank you so much for guiding us through that, because I think that's all definitely food for thought, from which none of us can divorce ourselves, given the reality of robots coming into our society and how they're used. With your piece, Shoal, this is the second last day of Curiosity Brisbane, and so Shoal has been out there for quite some time. People have been engaging with this work of art that also relies on robotics too. What have been your favourite reactions, or most memorable reactions from people so far as they've looked at and engaged with Shoal?
Yeah, I actually think the most memorable was about 45 minutes ago when we came past it. There was a group of, I don't want to say young people, but probably in their early 20s, who walked through, and it's the sort of people that you go like, oh, I wonder how they're going to interact with this piece of public art. And they started playing a game of chase with the fish around it, and they were just looping it, and things going a little bit haywire and spasming. But it's like, it was quite delightful. I guess it is a moment of witnessing exactly the sort of intervention, I guess, in that public space that I hope that would have. That they're on their way from City Beach to the cinema, God knows what. But like you get to have a game of run around with a school of fish in the middle of the mall. Like, awesome.
That's really cool.
That's definitely one of them.
But there's an interesting thing with human beings and robots.
Yeah.
Is that they want to test its limits.
Yeah.
This is you see this all of the time. You have robots, and we have them on an open day or whatever. People jump in front of it because they expect it to stop.
Yeah.
And I've been doing robots for a long time. It's probably one of the last things I would do is jump in front of a robot. And if there are young kids there, they'll climb all over it. They'll torment robots terribly, particularly young boys.
This is another ethical conversation. Can we torture robots?
And there's actually, I've seen at least 2 academic papers on this about children tormenting robots. Because they're kind of fearless, and I think they probably have a mental model of the robot that's way more sophisticated than the robot actually is, because they've seen robots on television. Right? They know what robots are. They're these super intelligent, benevolent things, and that's not necessarily a valid model to have.
So we should be worried about the future of robots, but we should just be worried about children in general, is a takeaway.
Yeah, goes without saying.
Hey, look, while I've got the both of you here, something that I've been asking across the Curious Conversations is just like, can you give us some cool trivia about the work that you've made, about robotics in general? Had a really great conversation with people who were experts in mycelium, which is, the building blocks of fungi and mushrooms and things that can grow all over the place. They were telling me things about fungi that had never occurred to me that I didn't know. The fact that most fungi in the world is not known, not named. We don't actually know what's out there. If you go out to certain parts of the world and look at fungi that have not been really documented, roughly 4 out of 5 of the things that you'll see have not been named or discovered properly in science, which is still blowing my mind. Tell me some things about Shoal that you know that we wouldn't, just simply by looking at it and engaging with it.
Yeah, the thing that sort of blew my brain a little bit when we were working on this project, our creative producer who's pushed it through to realisation, Matt Siri, brought on board a charitable partner for us to work with. As we're putting this thing in the city, we want to make a thing. Like, we need to find a hookup here that we can help with the story. And so the Reef Restoration Foundation, who are the foundation we've been working alongside as we've made this, they farm coral to replant on reefs.
Wow.
And I had no idea that this was happening. It's this massive volunteer network based out of Cairns. They head out to reefs that have been devastated by recent bleaching events and harvest the species of coral that are there to then grow them in highly fertile, safe waters, which amplifies their growth rate by something like 6 times so that they can then be replanted on the damaged reef.
Wow.
And I just, I guess I wasn't aware that there was that sort of like positive action taking place to combat these bleaching events. And yeah, that was my sort of like, oh wow.
That's
awesome.
really, really
moment
cool.
of hope in it. Like,
yeah,
it was really great.
Absolutely. And what a great way to trigger off conversations about what reef preservation and restoration actually looks like through your work.
Absolutely. Yeah, they were actually the ones too, when we were speaking with them, who mentioned that it feels like there is such a divide between, the woke metropolitan centres who care so much about these issues, but are so physically distant from them that the actual reality of it sometimes maybe doesn't register home beyond a political agenda. And I think that for us was, made it feel more important to land a work like this in a place like this, and also to look at where else we can take it to bring those issues, that are otherwise so distant and landed on our doorstep.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm sure you have a lot of facts and figures about robotics that, one, have terrified us, but two, are probably really delightful and mind-blowing. What are some facts and figures up your sleeve or trivia about robotics that can blow our mind?
2 things come to mind, and one just following up on David's point. One of my colleagues at QT, a guy called Matthew Dunbabin, he builds underwater robots. And the thing that he's been a lot over the last 2 years is taking coral spawn, which has been captured and grown on for a bit, and then using a robot submarine, which is a thing about this long, to actually deposit that. And so it goes with a sort of a bladder full of this coral spawn. It swims along like a robot vacuum cleaner, really. It just does a sort of lawnmower pattern backwards and forwards. But only squirts them out on places where it's prospective for them to take root. So if it's seagrass or sand, it won't squirt them out because they'll go nowhere there. So he's working with marine biologists to sort of help reseed the reef. Wow. I mean, the reef is in terrible strife. That's because of collectively all of us. And there's no quick solution to fixing the reef. I mean, it's going to take centuries. But what you can do is probably fix it where it's been damaged, and probably encourage it to grow south, right, where the waters are cooler. So that's using robots to try and do some restoration. It's a band-aid. It's not the right solution to the problem, but it's the best thing we can do at the moment. So that's one. And the second one I'd like to mention, it's a really interesting link between robots and theatre, is the word robot came from a play. Right? 100 years ago, this year, there was a play called Rossum's Universal Robots, written by a Czech playwright, Karl Čapek, and he introduced this idea of a robot. So it was a humanoid, human-like machine that did the work of people. So they were manufactured and they were used to do the drudgy work. So robot actually is a word from the Czech language that's got some aspect of serfdom, slavery, horrible labour, right? And that's what the word robot means. It's a Czech word, and 100 years old this year. And in that play, the robots get jack of that, and they rise up and they kill the humans. Right?
Something to look forward to.
You've probably seen that movie, right? It's a Czech play from 100 years ago.
Wow, I love that you brought that full circle. Did you know that?
I didn't know that. No, that's amazing. Back pocket, that one. It's great how optimistic it is too. From the start.
That's really a beautiful point to throw it to the audience, because we've got time for questions from all of you. We don't have a roving mic or anything, but it's a resident room. But if you do ask a question, I'll repeat it so we can ensure that everyone hears it. Are there questions from the crowd? Yes, one up here.
I've got a question for the Professor. Do we contribute to deep learning when we indicate that we are not a robot by identifying the bridges
Yes.
or the bicycles in the image?
Yes, you do.
Okay.
And someone's collecting that and saying, I've now got 50 people that think that's a bridge.
Yep.
So all of those things where you have to say, please identify the traffic lights or the bridge in this image, we are contributing to a robot's deep learning
Correct.
and understanding of what a bridge is.
So it's no use having a bazillion pictures of things if you don't know what are the objects within that. So there is this problem we call the data labeling problem. So you got a picture and a human has to say what's in that picture. And so they started off just mining pictures from Facebook and Instagram and so on, which generally people say, this is my cat or this is my dog. And the picture with that you could most reasonably say, the dominant thing in that is probably a keyword out of the text associated with social media posts. But that's kind of noisy and imprecise data. So there are companies that do this data labeling, and that's one way of getting data labeling done for free.
That's so interesting. So even though, ostensibly, it's about us proving to a computer that we are human. Like, make sure that you're ticking the right thing so that we know that you're not a bot. But what we're also doing is contributing to the data that creates something, that facilitates learning of AI.
Yeah. I think given that it's almost always traffic lights, pedestrian crossings, or bridges or buses.
Robots, they're really obsessed with buses
Yeah,
and
so
traffic lights.
I think maybe in the day it probably had some merit, but I can't imagine that today that data would be particularly useful. But
I've seen scripts like, obviously it's an image of an ancient document or an older type document, and obviously sometimes the E's and the T's are all a bit out.
Yep.
And it sort of tries, I think, to get you to identify.
They're the harder ones. Yeah.
And I think if you try a million people to say that's a T, they'd probably say, well, learn that T can be a T or that way or that way.
Yeah. Which is, I think, ways that they can improve the ability to recognise handwritten text.
Thank you so much for your question. There's a question here.
I quit them all in January this year. I'm still off.
I wanted to ask you, what's your take? Because a lot of people say, don't use social media because the government's stealing your information or, like targeted marketing. I'm like, I actually quite like the targeted marketing.
So the comment...
You're their kind of person.
So the comment or the question there is, tried quitting Facebook recently, had to go back on, couldn't function without it. What's your take on quitting social media? You've discovered that as much as data is being harvested, you don't mind it being harvested for targeted marketing, but you've actually quit them all recently.
I quit them. I think... Facebook in particular, I worry about what they do with the data. As they take over other social media platforms.
So Facebook is, of course, Facebook the platform, but the company owns WhatsApp, Instagram. Have I missed anything?
At the moment, I think that's
a lot.
That's
quite a lot.
That's the whole lot. And I think, having seen what's happened, I think over the last couple of years, live stream massacre in New Zealand, just this incredible disinformation, conspiracy theory propagation in the United States. I really just don't think it's a force for social good. I'm not sure if this could have been predicted, a long time ago. If you said, what if you just had everyone in the world connected? Zuckerberg just says, it'll be nice and we can all share things and be happy. But I've never actually heard him say anything very particularly intelligent. So I just worry. I think it's a bad thing for society. And so I'm not going to be any part of it.
But to what extent are you talking about this particular platform and its governance or lack thereof in terms of its policy?
It's that particular platform and its lack of governance or policy, and run by a person who's not elected, and I don't think is very smart. I think it's a really bad combination for the world. Did you see the movie The Social Dilemma? No.
It's a social network. The Social Dilemma is a documentary on Netflix, I believe, isn't it?
Yeah. Have a look at that.
I haven't signed up for it.
Okay. Netflix is probably more benign than Facebook.
But for those of us who haven't seen The Social Dilemma, it's good. I really like when we get homework out of these curious conversations. Why you were assigning us this homework?
It, I think, brings home what it is that the company gets out of having you as a participant. So I guess we sign up to those things because of what we get out. You know, it's the amenity targeted marketing. I guess what that documentary shows is what's in it for them and how they manipulate you to basically do what they want you to do. So you're a puppet.
Love it.
And that's not a pejorative all the time, but in this case, yes.
Yep.
I think one is slightly different because I feel like it's such a negative place and the news that it likes to project or, you know, people just watching cat videos all the time on there. But,
It's probably the least worst thing you could watch.
yeah, but like I feel like if you actually have something good to contribute and you master it, you can actually use it for good. So a lot of my friends actually go, oh, I really like your post. It's actually the only nice thing that comes up on my Facebook feed. Like I feel like it's sort of like money. Like, you know, we say money is the root of all evils, but I think it's just a magnification tool. So if you have very, you know, a lot of money and you're an evil person, I'm Donald Trump. But if you have a lot of money but you want to use it for good and volunteer, then you can actually help a lot more people and it's just your heart. So I think it's the same with social media. It's a tool, but it's whether or not you let it master you and your life.
So your argument is that social media is a tool. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you would say that social media is not neutral. Is that fair to say? Because there are people governing how the social media works.
I mean, it's there. It's been built for a reason. I mean, Facebook, if you consider its annual electricity consumption, all the computers are in there. I mean, to build that thing is a massive piece of money, right? So they're trying to get a return on that investment. They do that by manipulating people. I think the point is that it amplifies the good, and I get that. And I think that was probably the way it was it was conceived in quite sort of misogynist beginnings of Facebook, but put that aside. It was conceived as a way that people could be happy and share nice things. But it can amplify the bad stuff and the stupid stuff. And I think that sort of dawned on me maybe a bit late, that it has got this very dark side. Because humans have got a dark side, and it's just a big amplifier. And I think that's quite scary.
Thank you so much for your contribution. There were more questions as we came across this way. We'll take that one and then that one. Yes. Hi.
This is a question to the professor. Firstly, you're on point with your socks. I really like them.
The robot socks?
The comment was his socks are on point. They have robots on them.
So that's my comment. But no, just a question in relation to automated vehicles or self-driving vehicles. There's been research that the most efficient way of actually driving is through the use of roundabouts. But for some crazy reason, the vehicles cannot actually negotiate roundabouts. So is that a deep learning type of scenario that the automated vehicles have to go through, or is that a different type of learning that they've got to learn how to react to a roundabout?
So the question's about automated driving, and it's been shown that automated driving systems in their current state have huge problems with roundabouts. Reminds me of when I was a learner driver. What's the go there? Is there deep learning that needs to be applied there, and can it be?
I'm not sure if I've heard the story, and I'm not sure if it's true or whether it's an urban legend. It's a nice story. Roundabouts are not very common in the US, which is where a lot of this work's happening. So I think they call them traffic circles, and it terrifies them when they drive outside the United States. Remember when I went to the United States, they had these things called four-way stops. So there's a cross junction, everyone's got a stop sign. Well, what the hell? So you go there and everyone's stopped and they all kind of look at each other and then someone goes. They find them more terrifying. So
Something to contribute to that.
Yeah.
My family is actually US-based.
Yeah.
So in Australia, our roundabout is about giving way to the right, but in the US, it's about who gets there first. That's why they don't have any. So when everyone gets there, they look at each other and they're like,
Right.
first.
So The roundabouts is about giving way to people from a certain direction. In the US, it's about who gets there first. It's a very American mentality.
If it doesn't work, you get your handgun, right?
But on that
go
point, are there ways that automated cars, self-driving cars, will be able to broach the horrors of driving through roundabouts?
Yeah, so a lot of the road rules or the driving rules that are embedded in the cars come from two things. One is by monitoring human drivers. So there are lots of test drivers just drive around. You mine all of that for data. Most of that driving is happening in the US where there aren't many roundabouts. Teslas, as they're driving manually or autonomously, they're also logging data and sending it back. So that's how they will learn.
The capture codes that we use about, the buses, the cars.
That's all what it's for.
Yeah. So it's a mixture of engineers kind of typing rules in, but then we don't obey the rules 100% of the time, right? Because it'd be unsafe. You can't do things like overtaking and so on. So we have some discretion, and we probably each have got ideas of how much discretion we have when we're driving. That's the hard thing to embed in the robot. That sort of more softer knowledge.
Thank you so much for your question. One here.
One comment, if you want to do more homework on the impact of social media on society, listen to the Rabbit Hole podcast.
Oh, yes. So one more bit of homework. If you want to learn more about the impact of types of social media on society, the Rabbit Hole podcast, an incredible podcast from the New York Times, which more specifically focused on algorithms, not just solely, but more specifically focused on algorithms from memory surrounding YouTube and Google's responsibility around that, looking at how young men, young American men in particular, but people across the world have become radicalized through YouTube's algorithms. Yeah.
But my question is, through deep learning, would robots or do they have the potential to learn emotions?
Through deep learning, do robots have the potential to learn emotions?
It's a good question. When you have a deep learning system, right, you can think of it as a black box, right? So perceptions go in, actions come out. The way that what's inside the black box we don't quite understand, right? You could say it's just a million numbers, right? But that represents something, but it's not obvious what. You could look at each particular number and say, what does that number mean? We don't know what it means. It's like looking at an individual neuron in your brain and saying, well, what does that neuron represent? We don't really know. So internally, is there some sense of emotion inside that black box? I don't know. I don't think we will know. Is it useful for robots to have emotions? Is it sort of a different question? And it probably is. If robots are interacting with us, we're very good at recognizing, reading people's emotions. So already there are robots that can flag an emotional condition. It's not real, but the robot can look confused if it doesn't understand what you mean. And so robots with very simplistic, cartoony faces can look confused. Or if it wants to get through and people aren't letting it get through, it can look angry. It isn't really angry. It's saying, I want to go that way and there's someone in my way, so I'll pretend to look angry. And humans understand angry, and then they'll get out of my way. It's quicker and easier than saying, excuse me, could you get out of my way? Just look angry and the person will just move. So we're already starting to do that in robotics. Robots can also read people's emotional state. And so if the person looks confused or the person looks angry, then maybe you do a different thing. If you try to look angry, they looked angry back, then you think, whoa.
Actually, can I expand on that question? Because as robots and AI inevitably becomes rapidly more intelligent, I think that for a lot of us, there's the assumption that that results in sentience. But are they the same thing? Does intelligence eventually become sentience, or are they actually two separate things?
I'm not sure if we know yet what sentience is. I guess that's the big fear, right? That's, when robots become sentient and take over.
Do you see that as an inevitability? That we see it as an inevitability that robots will only get smarter and smarter and smarter, but does that necessarily mean they become conscious?
I think again we don't know quite enough about consciousness and what it means. I mean, part of it is a sense of self-awareness, and that's got I think an evolutionary advantage. If you're aware of yourself, and if you're aware of yourself, then you don't want to do things that are going to damage yourself, right? That's a sort of self-preservation thing. So I think to have self-preservation, you need to have some knowledge of self, and probably to have some ability to be selfish and to have goals and do the things to achieve the goals that you need to do as an individual. So whether that's sentience or not, I don't know. It must have an evolutionary advantage, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't have consciousness. We do almost everything because it's got an evolutionary advantage. So maybe it's something you have to build into robots if you want them to survive. Interesting questions.
Yeah.
Very interesting questions.
And on that existential riddle that will haunt you for the rest of the weekend, we might have to leave it there. I'm so grateful that you all spent the time this morning to come out here for Curiosity Brisbane for this particular curious conversation. Before we wrap up, we've just got a few thank yous to the Queensland Government through Tourism and Events Queensland, to Brisbane City Council through the Brisbane Economic Development Agency for their support of Curiosity Brisbane. Thanks also to Curiosity Brisbane's major partner, the Courier Mail, media partner 9 Queensland, and Curious Conversations partner NBN Co, who are providing the support for us to live stream these morning's conversations globally. And finally, thank you to our precincts partners, where you can find all the Curiosity experiences: Brisbane City Council, Southbank Parkland, Arts Queensland, State Library of Queensland, and Queensland Museum. But could you please join me in saving our last round of thanks for our wonderful guests today, Peter and David.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Like we said at the start, this is the last weekend of Curiosity Brisbane. The weather is great. Get outdoors. If you don't know where all the curiosities are, you can go onto the website curiositybrisbane.com. You'll find them all there. Stay safe, stay curious, and have a great festival.
Yeah.